Hey, everybody, what's up? It's your boy MJ. Welcome to the Black Wine Guy Experience. My guest today is James Beard award-winning wine journalist and author Alice Feiring. Alice was proclaimed the Queen of Natural Wines by the Financial Times, and she has written for newspapers and magazines including the New York Times, New York Magazine, Time, Afar, World of Fine Wine, and the beloved wine zine Noble Rot. Alice is also a frequent guest on public radio. I'm struggling with that word today, guys. You know I don't edit, so it's all good. I want to say West. Alice lives in New York and publishes the authoritative natural wine newsletter, The Feiring Line. And she has recently released her sixth book entitled To Fall in Love, Drink This, a Wine Writer's Memoir. Welcome, Alice.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know it's a busy time for you. The book was just released.
That's right.
But I'm glad I'm considered legit enough media that you came on here to talk about
I've been waiting for this moment for over a year.
That's awesome. You know who said it? Rita Jamay was fun. She was great too. She's like, I was trying to say, how can I get on the podcast? She was an awesome guest. All my guests are awesome because the whole thing is you are people I want to sit down and have a bottle of wine with and learn more about. So thanks for being here. All right, you're the Queen of Natural Wine, so tell us what we are drinking today.
Okay. What we're drinking today is Bichi it's a Mexican wine. And Bichi is based in Tecate, outside of Tecate, sort of Baja California, nearing that area. And it is a blend of old Pais, like 85-year-old Pais, and what the farmer thinks is Carignan. These are old vines in gorgeous, very sandy, pinkish granitic soils with mountain right in the back of it. And sometimes it's all dried farm, all organic. And what Noel tell us, this is a 2021, and I had it this morning, and I was like, oh my God, his 2021s are so beautiful. The last two vintages have been a little bit wild. Let's see. Let me give this a swig to see what it's like.
Well, got a lot of red fruit.
Man, it's beautiful.
And just a little bit of funk on the nose, but that's that good funk, that terroir.
It hasn't really landed yet. It has just landed a little bit. Needs to, but yeah.
But I'm excited. It's kind of crunchy, kind of carbonic-y feeling to me. And I saw Tecate when she brought it. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I know Tecate, the beer.
Right, exactly, right.
So I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
But so let me tell you a little bit about what they do. They have 10 acres that they farm themselves biodynamically, but then they have found other parcels of very old vines that are dry farmed in the area. And I find that the climate and the terroir is so brutal. So to be in the vineyards, hear rattlers, it just flips me out a bit. And then you get a wine like this. So it is destemmed. It's not whole cluster. It's destemmed, foot trodden gently. There may be a couple of berries there that didn't get stomped. Mm-hmm. It is fermented in cement amphora, because they couldn't find an artisan around who could actually make one out of clay, so they just got the mold and poured cement. Then it goes into old barrels and stainless. The varieties were vinified differently. It's 0 sulfur. And for me, it's just a beautiful example of a completely natural wine. There's some people that there's definitely a little bit of Brettanomyces or Band-Aid-y quality on the finish, smoky Band-Aid, which is often a characteristic of Pais. So I don't know if it's the Brett or it's a little bit of the Pais. I just think it kind of makes a beautiful picture of a brutal environment.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And I love Baja. And there's some, I love that this is, I would get more new wave. For of a producer, Pais, that's Mission, right? We know it as Mission. Yep. Love that it's old vines, and Val de Guadalupe is kind of like the Napa Valley of Mexico, exactly. But they have a lot of old vines. I know they have some old petites. There's some really good old vines in Mexico, right. And this is this is always going to be. I knew this was going to be good because, I'm gonna get into. I don't know what. I don't understand natural wine, and I'm glad I'm here with you to help explain it to me. So I'm excited, as I said. So I like to start at the beginning. So where are you from?
I'm from Brooklyn,
Okay. Wow.
born in Brooklyn, and then I say
Wow.
sheepishly raised on Long Island. So when I was ripped out of Flatbush and brought to Baldwin, Long Island, where nobody should live. Sorry.
It's okay. I'm from
Kind of-
Jersey, and I understand there's some places you shouldn't live in, and I get it. I totally get.
Or be brought up in.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a cultural desert.
So I love it. You're from Brooklyn, and you said ripped out of Flatbush.
Right.
So what was it like growing up on Long Island back in the day?
You know, it's really funny that I can't remember much other than escaping into New York.
Wow.
So I had a lot of. I went to yeshiva, so
Okay.
an Orthodox yeshiva. So I did not actually go to school in my neighborhood except for kindergarten.
Okay.
So I can remember being a tiny little girl and wandering just wandering and having neighbors come and bring me back to my mother, and walking to school. But because I was on a bus for most of my life, going to and from school, my life was really going to Brooklyn to see relatives and going to the dentist in New York and going to my father's office in New York and going to my aunt and uncle's jewelry business in New York. So I remember New York more than Long Island,
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
which is where you had to go because there was nothing to do on Long Island. At least on the South Shore.
So did you go to university in New York, or did you go away to university?
Okay, more sad stories. This took about a sentence in my memoir. I totally messed up my for a lot of reasons. Bad divorce in the family, bad student. Went to Nassau Community for the first year that a friend's mother just got me in, and then I got myself out of there as fast as possible to the nearest destination, which unfortunately was Stony Brook. So I stayed on Long Island.
Okay. So you went to
Totally wrong place for me, but there you go.
And did you major in English or did you major in journalism? What was your?
I was interdisciplinary, so basically it was like, okay, I got to graduate. What am I? How many credits do I have in this? So I graduated with an interdisciplinary degree in literature, dance, and music.
Okay. I like it. And did you dance? I mean,
I did.
Did you dance professionally or just with a troupe or just?
Never professionally.
What type
I'd
of?
say semi-professional.
What type did you? Was it modern? Was it?
I started out as a little ballerina, and then I didn't grow very tall, and my tits got too big. So that's kind of like not happening for a ballerina, right? So then, then I went to modern, where they accepted these things, and I did Graham technique.
Okay.
And I did a lot of performance in college, and then afterwards I did something called Morris dancing on the street, but that's a whole different story.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that's different.
Well, I think there's a lot of overlap with music and wine, and so dance and fluidity. We'll get into that, but I can see how those disciplines kind of do come together. So you're growing up on Long Island. You're
Right.
feeling trapped. Orthodox family, you said?
At least the mother side. My father was profligate.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a famous agnostic who loved to torture my mother by going out for his bacon on Yom Kippur breakfast.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was cool.
So besides your
Sorry,
dad-
just
no, these are the stories. Like I want people I never knew that about Alice. That's why we're here. So was there wine on the table? There's traditional foods you ate, right? Like,
yeah, there was traditional food, at least up until the time that I became a vegetarian.
Okay.
Or at least a pescatarian, but it was a vegetarian first. And but wine, absolutely not. It was Manischewitz and like crappy kosher wine all the way. None. I remember there was a Hurricane Donna. Where there were boats. It was a really bad hurricane, and the cellar was flooded. My father brought up probably a case of, he called it champagne. I vividly remember the taste. He said, well, let's open one. And it was I always thought because of that, and I think I was like 5 or 6 at the time, that I always thought that champagne tasted like salty peanuts. And so I was convinced for years, for decades, that I didn't like champagne, and it was probably some garbage from upstate New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's funny because I was actually listening to a book this morning. I listen to books when I work out. It's like hands-free. So, it was actually a marketing book. He was talking about how we live our lives is we have an experience and we create a story around it. So you had this sparkling wine. You're like 5 years old. And you're like, you're an adult. You're like, I don't want
I've already
to.
decided.
No, you've already decided, right? Like you were living your whole life for a long time.
I think that I was, when I went to graduate school in Boston and I studied dance therapy, but that's also where I started, getting into wine, and I was in a tasting group, and I think that is finally, so I'm really in my mid-20s before I changed my notion about champagne. Can you imagine?
Yeah. I mean, it happens to people with all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, I understand the psychology of it. So I was like, the next question was, how do you get into wine? And so you were in grad school in Boston, studying dance therapy. And did you mention tasting groups? So how did you get into wine?
By chance. Well, I was already interested in wine. I started, back in those days, you could get Rieslings for $2. I mean, it was like, actually, I was just listening to Victor Schwartz's episode, and he was talking about how cheap wine was back in those days. So, and I was also exploring whatever I could find. But as chance had it, I mentioned Morris dancing. So a fellow Morris dancer, my friend Peter, had a wine collection. And I had a roommate who had a wine collection, and she wanted to get into the wine business. And so my apartment, lucky for me, became the place for bi-weekly wine tastings.
I love it.
So this was going on informally all through graduate school. So for 2 years, Natalie moved out, and then I kept the tradition going until I left 8 years later. So that's what happened. When I left Boston, I started writing again when I was doing my master's thesis, because I had stopped because I believed a professor told me, who basically ripped me apart, and I stopped. I started writing during my master's thesis and never stopped. And at a certain point, 8 years in, I started writing very seriously, to the point where I had to shit or get off the pot. I just felt I needed to live my life as a writer, and I couldn't do it up in Boston. I could not see writing there. Just couldn't. I had to get back to New York. I needed the grit.
I mean, it's so funny. I mean, Boston is a major city. Cities are so different, right? I lived in Philadelphia, and I remember living in Philadelphia. I was like, I had to get back to New York.
Funny.
Yeah, I was like, this is not. And I don't know if maybe it's the blue collarness of both those cities or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's something that New York has that those cities don't have.
Yeah, there was a properness to it, the blue collar thing, and also which Boston has that. Well, Philadelphia has its share of university, is that there's a constant flux of people who will never be more than 18 to 22.
Right.
And there's a certain stasis that happens because of it.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, people go to Harvard and they don't stay in Boston, right? Or BU, or and same people go to Temple or UPenn, and very few people hang around.
Yeah.
They all come to New York. They're trying to get jobs in New York.
Great.
So, when you left Boston, you were writing. Were you writing about wine? What were you writing about at that time?
I was writing essays.
Okay.
I was writing essays. I was writing fiction.
Okay.
And I wanted to write fiction. So I really didn't write about wine until I landed in New York, and I knew that I couldn't get I've never had a service job. I've never worked in restaurants, which is crazy, but I just didn't think that I could be a bartender, let's say, and call myself a writer. I needed to go into journalism while my other stuff was cooking.
Mm-hmm.
It's cooking for a really long time.
But you make a good point. And it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning with stories. And when you say you're a writer, then you're a writer, And I love that you that was like a preset in your mind. You're like, we talk about people, actors, like they're like, yeah, well, you're a waiter. Like, are you in service? Are you? And it's tough. I know people have to make a living, but that is a very powerful thing that you were like, I'm not a writer if I'm tending bar.
Right. I couldn't, or until I had that first novel published.
Yeah.
So, it's just the way that I did it, and I needed the validation of seeing my name in print. It's it never gets old. It's like my 6th book. It doesn't get old.
Yeah.
Another book deal, you get it done.
And then you go out on the road, and people like are excited to see you.
Yeah,
It's you having not an effect. You're having an affect on people, which is really, really cool.
And writing is so solitary that, and if you're in a different art, you get immediate validation. And here it really is delayed. And so you think, oh my God, you read me? It's amazing. Thank you for reading me. No, thank you for reading me. No, thank you for reading me.
When people say they love the podcast, I say, well, thank you for taking 90 minutes to 2 hours out of your week to listen to me goof off and talk and drink wine. I appreciate that. It does mean a lot when people pay attention,
It definitely does.
So you're writing essays. Were these on various sides, or did you slide right into wine, or were you writing? I read somewhere that they were humorous, and
Yeah, my first pieces were just essays about life.
Okay.
And when I came here, I started pitching wine stories because it was something that I felt like most people who first start writing about wine think they know about. And I thought, I've been tasting for 10 years. I could write about this. But in retrospect, in retrospect, I kind of cringe that I was pitching stories before I've ever really set foot in vineyards. So in a lot of ways, I didn't really feel like a wine writer until I started spending a lot of time in vineyards, which is like the late 90s. And I was writing about wine for 10 years before that really happened.
Very interesting theme. You were writing for 10 years, and you're like, oh, I didn't really feel like a wine writer until I stepped into a vineyard. And this is my shade. But then we have people who get a piece of paper that they know they were tested on 6 wines.
Right.
And now they're a wine educator.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
Like, we're talking like studying wines for 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I got a little certificate. But, I was always very good at picking wine somebody would like, sussing out finding a worthy wine to write about, which I was doing. And right now, I think that is necessary, and people need to find their people to lead them to. But it's just, it's not doing wine service to do that.
I don't think so either. I don't think so. I think I agree with you. I think that it's commoditizing things. And I used to work in education, and education's a commodity nowadays. It's a product.
Exactly.
That's why, if you're driving down New Jersey Turnpike, like Maine, it's like go to Maine for Rutgers tuition. Like, it's competitive. It's a business. Right. And they'll appreciate this too, talking about putting your work. Like, I just read in the New York Times yesterday, a professor at NYU got fired, the organic chemistry, because it was too hard.
It was too hard.
What world do we live in where kids can sign a petition and the professor gets fired?
I don't get it.
And so, like, I see that a little bit in wine. Like, I don't have any certificates, but I've been drinking wine for years, and I've been fortunate. I've tasted a lot of good wines, and same thing with you. I've worked retail. But I worked retail, and I was always good at pairing people with wines. And so and I went to law school, so I'm pretty good at research. Like, a writer's good at research. So I just find like something will catch my eye, and then I'll go down a rabbit hole, and I'm like, wow, look at that wine, So, but as a writer, you do good research. Writers do great, incredible research. And because of that, I think you have a body of knowledge that people with even advanced certificates don't have, just because we study for the test in America. We don't, once you get test involved, you can be studying for the test instead of for the sake of learning.
Which may be one reason I was miserable at testing. I always but, and it was like, forget about the but, just answer the question.
Right.
But it could be this way. I'm like, I was miserable.
So you start. So you've written for you've written pieces for a lot of magazines, and did you ever at any point did anyone ever offer you a full-time job, or was this a conscious choice to be the independent writer?
No.
Okay.
Oh God, no, no. Along the way, there have been certain contracts, and every time you get one, you think, oh my God, I've made it. So my first one was with Interiors magazine because I wrote about design. Then I had a contract with Cooking Light magazine. That was great. Was that it? And Time magazine. And that was it. And I think by the time that I had a name, I was considered too controversial to be given a job, which I would have loved. I mean, the idea of having a platform besides me instead of always having to build my own platform would be, my God, it would be amazing. So if anybody out there wants to give me a job, just go ahead.
I get some of the same thing. I'm like, how come people not offer me a job? They're like, you do such good work. I'm like, yeah, man, thanks. I could do this for you.
You're right.
There is that the catch-22 of independence in writing or journalism. That is
right.
As that you've lived for a few years here now.
Yes. What's funny is my independence is something that the French have always really appreciated and actually brought up about, my liberty to write what I want to write and how they admire that. And I was thinking, a little stability wouldn't be so
I know.
bad.
You don't even know.
I know.
That's awesome. So you're on this journey, and you've been writing about wine. You finally start visiting vineyards. What did you notice or feel the first time you actually visited a vineyard?
Let me think about this. The first time that I was actually in a vineyard was 1990, and it was Long Island. And it was winter, and I don't think I was so nervous about the job that I had to do that I don't think I really took notice. But the first time that I remember being really struck by it was probably in the Loire Valley, and just the Loire Valley or Beaujolais, and just looking, and also in winter, and just thinking that these vines looked like just praying creatures. And just being very taken by, each one had an individualistic soul, very different from going to miles and miles and miles of vineyard in Napa. And when you see old and gnarled vines, they're just so like fascinating old people that you have to know. And then it was gradual. Every once in a while, there's one that just takes you over, and you're just like, oh my God, this is a spiritual vineyard. And you just realize that vineyards have personalities and expressions, and they're important places.
So they are. And I remember the first time I saw like an old Zinfandel vine in Sonoma, and you're just like, oh my God.
They're incredible.
Yeah. And it was winter. Yeah. And it was just, you're just like, I don't even have the words. It's like you said, it's incredible.
Right.
It's like, so I get it. So you covering wines from around the world. When did this, how'd you become the queen of natural wine? So
Thank
I've
you,
had,
Jancis.
yeah,
the queen herself. The queen calls a queen.
Yes.
I don't know. How did I? Well, I was writing about natural wine before anybody else.
What year did you start writing about natural wines?
2000.
Right, because I've had Lee Campbell on, and I think she kind of, like, I think you kind of put people onto him. Like, people started taking notes in like 03, 04, but you started in 2000. What was your first experience? What was it, like a lightning bolt? Was it like you got sulfite headaches? What had you seek these out? Like, how did it come about?
Well, I was writing the Food and Wine guide in 2000.
Okay.
And that was actually my first book. I don't count it in my six. And I was tasting so many wines that I just felt the wine world was becoming bereft, and they were all tasting the same, no matter what grape, and they were all powerful, and they all tasted disgusting, and there was no Barbera anymore, there was no Nebbiolo anymore, there's no California wines that I could drink anymore. Like, what the hell was happening? And it was getting very difficult to find enough wines for the book. I think that's why they didn't have me back for the second time. So I discovered the wines from Turnaround, like Joe Dresner.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the problem was the world was in love with New Oak. And then, lo and behold, I found out there was a whole world of technology behind it. And the wines that I was liking when I, did my research were wines that were from organic viticulture, that were made with native yeast and had no additive other than grape, no added tannin, no enzymes, and had low to no, well, actually back then, zero sulfur was very rare.
Yeah.
So moderate, low use of sulfur. So I thought, wow, this is very interesting. And I wrote a story in the New York Times, for better or for worse, winemakers go high tech. And I was still figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a third person piece. It was a journalistic piece. It was not an opinion piece. And after that, where I think I actually got death threats from California because of it, because I was outing all of the technology.
Mm-hmm.
After that is really when I started spending time in the vineyards, like intensely, and discovering the natural wine fairs of France. So I went to La Dive Bouteille for the first time in 2002. And very few Americans, very few anybody else other than French there at the time. So that's how. And that was really all. As a journalist, it was an amazing world to report on, but there were no places that you could write about it for. Because they didn't want to hear it, so I started to blog.
Those big publications don't want to.
They don't want to mess around with it. Back
Why?
then,
Because they can't advertise?
Yeah. Because they would lose advertisers.
Yes.
So back then it was an issue. Now people are getting their money from different areas. It's not an issue anymore.
Yeah. So I have people who I have MWs who listen to this, and I have people who, for some reason, find me and somehow tell me they learn about wine on this podcast. So let's go a little bit deeper on, excuse me, the technology piece, because I think that's a point where I kind of understand the natural wine thing. So when you said they were into technology, are you referring to things like oak chips and mega purple and like or you even going as far as like, because it is manipulating micro-oxygenation, which
actually you just had a wine in the summer that I don't know whether Michael Havens still does, but Michael Havens was in the story that I wrote. He was very unhappy with it because he was very in favor of using micro-ox. Mm-hmm. So
that wine actually held up well. That wine was amazing.
What vintage was it?
Oh, it was like something from the 80s.
That he wasn't using micro-ox back then?
Yeah. Or early 90s. It was old. Yeah, it was old.
I'd love to do because it was, anyway, so yes, things like micro-ox, which is used to soften tannins. Now, that for me is problematic because tannins are really important for the aging process and for the protection of the wine. But so I used, in the Battle for Wine and Live, I think I called it, or maybe it was a Naked Wine, robbing a wine of its old age. Mm. So there's reverse osmosis, concentrator machines, and all the variants. There is added tannins, a lot of enzymes. I haven't gone through, I mean, of course, designer yeasts. There are hundreds of yeasts that can manipulate the aromas and the flavors of the wines. There's, all sorts of things that you can do. Some are quite toxic to prevent Brettanomyces, that kind of thing. There are about 72, if you add them up. It could be, depending on how you count, 72 to 100, whatever. But a lot of the machines. There's this kind of weird washing machine for the grapes that can. That's like some people just put their grapes through a washing machine. I'm like, why? So
Wow.
it's just really. Do you need this kind of technology? And because of course, if you're washing, then that means that you have to yeast that kind of thing.
So yeah, it's entitled like it's like let the grapes do what they're supposed.
Right. Yeah, and talking about like enzymes. So what do they use for us to really break down the wines? I mean, the grapes, so they ferment better. There's also then you can go into extreme temperature control. There is even high-tech devices to make a natural wine. I'm going to say that in quotes, to strip the sulfur out or the sulfides out. There's also dialysis, spinning cone.
Oh yeah,
Like,
no. Well, I know people spin sometimes to lower the alcohol.
Right.
But I didn't realize. Yeah, and I said that too because you see, there's wines say 0 sulfite. So like I'm like, but because it's in a supermarket, I know it's been processed.
Exactly.
So I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you're better off with that one, bro.
Exactly. And I think hydrogen peroxide is basically the hot ticket to remove your sulfites. Yeah. So no, it wasn't about health or anything. It just that it was taste. It was just taste. And then, of course, drinking that way aligns with the way I eat and my food philosophy, so it makes sense.
So yeah, saw this great clip of Anthony Bourdain. He said he hates the term farm to table because everything, but yeah, I mean, when I hear somebody said they were like the first farm to table restaurant, I was like, that's not even possible.
Right.
I was like, that's not even possible. Like literally, I know people like even Kevin Zraeli when he's working upstate, like they got their food from a farm and just cooked it. I mean,
Right.
Chez Panisse, like literally, it was in the 90s. Like, we're the first ever farm to table. I was like, no, you're not.
Right.
Stop it. So you said when you went to that first like fair, natural wine fair in France, you were like, there's only a handful of Americans there,
Well,
if any, besides yourself.
I went with Joe Dresner.
Okay.
And Joe brought people.
Okay.
And I was not traveling with him, though I hooked up with them for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Jenny Lefcourt, who was then living in France. And she was the only other American. So you go today to La Dive, that has become a huge show. And it's international. Like, people are there from all over the world. It's crawling with American importers. So it was, I really had the sense that this was something that hardly anybody knew about. There were maybe 20 people showing their wines, 20 wineries. Today they're like 150 or something, that kind of thing.
So what is your elevator pitch? What's your definition of a natural wine?
Okay, I have been doing my homework, so I watched Pascaline's fabulous one, and she gave you a very, very detailed idea of what, but I simplify it and I say organic viticulture or some sort of organic viticulture, nothing added, nothing taking away, except if needed, some low amount of sulfites. Simple for me.
I like that. But I also like that you stated organic viticulture too, because that's where I get confused, because there is no, I mean, the world does need some gatekeepers. There's no there's no natural wine board, right? Like you can get Demeter certified. There's certifications for certain practices, sustainable farming. But like people could touch on a lot of the things that you say, but the grapes might not be organic, but they just use natural yeast. So like this is natural. They don't, they don't, so I think.
Yeah, the buying grapes thing is it's very dicey unless I know people who only buy from people they know.
Mm-hmm.
And then in California, it's kind of difficult to buy from people that you know or have any impact on the farming. So it's really difficult in places like California that have huge vineyards that are very corporate.
Yeah, I mean, there's money to be made. Somebody's gonna make that.
Right, exactly.
Money. You know what? I love that definition. It's a great time to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Alice Feiring in just a second, guys. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Yes, California. It's actually interesting. I had in the studio the week before. I had Sam Couture, who's Phil Couture's son, and and Phil Couture is the godfather of organic mountain farming.
Mm-hmm.
But he works for a lot of big companies because that's who can afford to pay. But it is good fruit, it's like you said, it's tougher to do it. California's a tough place to make wine if you're a young winemaker and you don't have a lot of money.
Yep.
It's
nearly impossible.
It's just, and I love California wines. It's the only wine country I lived in, but that is the reality. Like and there are. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen it. You're probably in it. That Natural Wine movie. Are you?
I'm not in it.
You're not. How you're not in it? What the hell? Who cast that movie?
And I've been trying to see it. I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I did an IG live with this young woman. She makes it's called Margins Wine.
Yes.
And she saw a post on someone had posted something, and I said natural wine. I don't know. And so she reached out. I was like, nah, you got to try my wine. So she sent me her wines. Her wines were good.
Yeah, they're good.
They were good. But she was very forthcoming, like another winemaker, and he's not a corporate dude, but he just he's been at it for like 30 years. So and he's like, does she do anything with Amphor? She's like, I can't fucking afford Amphor. like and she's doing and I think she's not doing well. I'd love to hear on the hybrid grapes we have in this area. Mm-hmm. But I mean, she is using more. I mean, she does a Grenache, she does a Chenin Blanc. She's doing typical varietals, but they're these crazy old neglected vineyards that have been brought back to life off the side of the road somewhere. All the wines were under. I think the most was like 12.5, but but whatever she did, for me, I don't care about the alcohol per se, as long as it fits my flavor profile. As long as you get that ripeness in the fruit for me. Mm-hmm. If it's 12 or if it's 15.5, things have to line up. But she was, I was really blown away. They were really nice wines.
She's had some, Megan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's had some wines, I think, that are 11.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that are really, she's got a beautiful touch.
Yeah.
She really does.
Very deft. Yep.
Yeah. And I think the only chance for young or new, whatever age winemakers is try to get fruit that nobody else wants because it's a variety that nobody else wants. And there's a lot of that in California because California still, wants like the top dog varieties.
Yeah.
But let's talk about hybrids. I'm happy to talk about hybrids.
Well, before you talk, talk about hybrids because you actually said it was probably some bad sparkling from upstate New York, but now there's a resurgence up because the oldest wine in America is actually up there. I couldn't believe that. It's related to a religion, something brothers. But anyway,
it's Christian Brothers.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So let's talk about hybrid grapes because when Yannick came on, he brought something from Vermont.
Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't bring anything from Vermont.
Yeah. But yeah, let's hybrid grapes.
Okay.
Because they seem to be, this is my perception, a darling of some of the natural wine crowd because they're more affordable.
Oh, hardly affordable.
Really?
Yeah. There are some people, affordable. It's interesting. When Deirdre Heakin started, they were expensive. She's never raised her prices. So now, as everybody else is going up, they seem more reasonable. And she was making a point, hey, look at Vermont. Vermont and in To Fall in Love, Drink This, I have a chapter about Vermont because it's basically a state that did it right. And they have a lot to thank for Deirdre Hicken, which is basically hybrids are what grows here. If you're growing, it's a fool's project to grow vinifera. And if you treat the hybrids to really good viticulture, she grows, but actually you cannot hope to make a world-class wine in Vermont, or at least an important wine, or get it out of the state if it's not organic and it's not natural, which is remarkable because there's no other state in this country that could actually have that claim, or really anywhere else in the world. But at this point, with all the wonderful farming, these grapes are really having a lot to say. So it wasn't so much that the hybrids were bad, but they were being disrespected. The treatment was bad. So right now they're really, it's a local wine done right. They're not styling their wine on a different, they're not trying to make Bordeaux. They're not trying to make Napa Cabernet. They're not trying to be Burgundy, which of course everybody who starts out wants to imitate. No, we want to find out what Vermont is. And that is what Vermont does, right? And it happens that their instrument of expression is something that can grow there, which are hybrid grapes. And there are some fabulous ones. I love Marquette, and that's a relatively new one. La Crescent is beautiful. There's a lot of them do have an argent from Muscat, so a lot of them are very aromatic. But little skin contact that goes down. And but there are some that are coming out that are more affordable. Iapetus is more affordable, and also Ellison Estate, that those hit at under 30.
Well, one thing I would definitely have to agree with you, if wine is about terroir, if it's about a sense of place, it would make more sense to grow grapes that are native to where they're from instead
or
of
at least you can grow without major intervention.
Yeah.
So Deirdre's story was really, I always get this mixed up, whether it was 2011 or 2012. Hurricane Virginia, I think was Virginia? Can't remember. She had one little vineyard up where she lives, but she was buying her other grapes and keeping a sharp eye on the farming, and it was a very, very wet year. And her farmer said, I got to spray. And she said, don't spray, and I will buy everything. Just don't spray. And after that, she took the vineyard. She was able to rent the vineyard and did her own farming after that. And the grapes were beautiful. The grapes were fine.
That's awesome.
It was a good lesson.
So let's talk about your controversial, if you will, 2008 debut.
Yes.
The Battle for Wine and Love, or How I Saved the World from Parkerization.
Right. I did a good job. Whatever. Yes, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so it's 2008, and we're talking. And we assume just for people, because we're talking about Robert Parker Jr., who was the penultimate wine critic for decades, and for better or for worse, you mentioned shaped a whole generation of winemakers, who. So funny, we were talking about approval before, but who sought his approval because it meant more. You could charge more for your wine, and so like you said, wines were just all began tasting the same because they were just a flavor profile that he liked, and people were creating. That was the era of big Pinot Noir. Everything was big, extracted, and I don't think Alice liked that.
Alice didn't like it.
So, did you start writing the book, or did you pitch someone on the book first? How did was it brewing for years? You're like, fuck it, I got to do something. You put your foot down,
No, it wasn't. What was brewing for years is that I needed to write a book, and I couldn't figure out.
Okay.
And I was going to write. I found it recently in 2002, a natural wine guide, which couldn't get a publisher for. And I forgot what the original book was going to be, but it was a little bit about the changing face of the wine world. And I remember looking for an agent, and she rejected me and said, basically, this isn't the wine you want to drink. I mean, this is wine you want to drink. This isn't the book you want to write, and I got really angry at myself, and it was like, yes, it is the book that I want to write, but I didn't do a really good job of convincing you. And at that point, I hadn't had the nerve to write it in first person.
Okay.
And at that point, I just felt that my academic career was this. I was the kid in the back of the class who was always afraid to raise her hand. For one, the answer seemed so obvious, it had to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And for a few years in wine events, I felt like that kid. Like, isn't everybody else noticing? And then other people are saying, this isn't terroir, this isn't terroir. Like, why did you change? You had decades of making gorgeous wines. Why are you making wine now that looks like a Napa Cabernet? But it didn't show up in the Wine Spectator, even though Tom Matthews was very upset about it. So he is no longer the head of Wine Spectator, but at one point, he and I viewed the world similarly. So I finally said, it's enough of being quiet. I'd like everybody else. Obviously, I'm not the only one who feels this way, and I'm going to write a book about it. But at that point, when I got rejected, I had I was empowered to try to have my own voice. And the only way I felt that I could tell the story is how Robert Parker's popularity among winemakers was robbing me and other people who drank the way I did of the wines that we loved. And it felt like a mass extinction.
Mm.
And so I, with all due respect to Bob, the reason that I use Parkerization is because he had become bigger than himself, and he had become, a brand, which I meant to depersonalize it from Robert Parker. So that's why I use Parkerization, because wine had become Parkerized. I'm not the first person who have said it. So that is what happened. And then when I got the title, I knew I would sell it. Some things are like that. Got the title, knew I'd sell it. And it did.
Yeah.
That's what, and, some people were not happy with me.
Well, yeah, like what was some of the the feedback you received?
Well, people in California were furious, so much that I felt really unwelcome, and afraid to go. Oh, when I did events, some people in the audience were really brutal, and it really was interesting. There was one in Healdsburg that I wrote about it in Naked Wine. Somebody who had a Pinot blog or something just got up and was lambasting me, cutting me to shreds. And then another woman whose father owned vineyards got up and just argued the other point about how the way that they needed to grow grapes were killing the vines now, and how bad it was for viticulture, and how she longed for the day of making just honest wines. And so it was really pretty interesting. And, when I wrote it, like, I was nobody. I had a blog. I wrote a book. I didn't think anybody would notice. That's the truth.
I mean, but like you said, it like so much is in the title. Like people you do that book. I mean, people are gonna buy it. Some people bought it just to shoot it down. I'm sure.
Right.
Right. And I like what you said, because I was like, did you have an actual problem with him? But no, it's just kind of what happened. You think I don't know him, but I don't think he set out to be that he was going to change wine per se.
No.
But like you said, the winemakers. It was the producers.
Yeah, but I will say that Bob did have a willful ignorance about it. He didn't start out liking those wines, and actually he liked Rhones. And I don't understand how he didn't notice the change in Chateauneuf to where I used to love Chateauneuf, but there's maybe 2 or 3 Chateauneufs that I can drink now. And I could say the same thing. And at one point, it wasn't all Grenache. Grenache is powerful. And there were 13 plus grapes that would go into an old-fashioned Chateauneuf. They were beautiful. And all of a sudden, everybody, left their concrete tanks behind and their old wooden barrels and went to small new oak with high toast. How could he not notice? Anyway, so yeah, I do have a little. He was, but I know he said he wouldn't read the book and he called it some name. But yet, people who wrote for him really liked the book. So go figure. And tried to get him to read it. They said he'd actually like it if he'd read it, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I love Grenache. I haven't had the opportunity to have some of the older stuff, so I only know a lot of that big stuff. And yeah, I mean, and
try to find Domaine de Villeneuve. It's very old-fashioned.
Okay.
It gives you an idea of what the old-fashioned Chateauneuf was like. It's still a very beautiful wine.
Yeah. So that book comes out, and you said, I just had a blog. No one knew about you, but then people knew about you after that.
Yeah, and people didn't know about the blog. I mean, I was an early blogger. And
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think, obviously if you were blogging wine tracks, we're all wine geeks, so you're gonna get
Right.
found if you're doing something
Right.
like writing a blog back in the day.
And it was nominated for James Beard, which was shocking.
That's awesome.
It was crazy. Wouldn't happen again.
Never say never. All right, so what was your next book? What was your book after?
Naked Wine, Letting Grapes do what comes naturally. I never liked that second. But that came out in 2011, and I pitched it in 2009 when I realized that the natural wine thing was happening, and at some point people were going to try to make fake natural wine or try to squirrel around it. So I wanted there to be a basis for where it came from, who are the players, and what was the objective, to try to give some basic history for it. So that was that. But it was based on my attempt to make a natural wine in California in a place that was hostile to natural wine. So that was also, those first two were also narrative nonfiction.
Okay.
Then came For the Love of Wine. I have a lot of love in my titles.
I know.
My Odyssey Through the World's Most Ancient Wine Culture, which was my love poem to the country of Georgia. And
when did you first go to Georgia? Because I had Lisa Granick on, and she's also
2011.
Okay. And how and why did that come about?
My first Georgian wine is 2008, and I was very intrigued. I had another one, also intrigued, but I realized there were problems going on in Georgia. Then I got invited to the first international Qvevri conference, and how could I not go to something with such a charming title? And I fell in love with it from before I landed. I was just completely head over heels in love with the place, the country, the food, what their tradition, in the unbroken tradition of making wine in Qvevri. And I'm also I'm fascinated by post-Soviet winemaking cultures. And so their attempt to come back to their original winemaking culture.
Right, because their wine was all used to make sweet wine or something like that.
Well, that was one of their most popular ones.
Okay.
From Racha. But they also made sparkling wine.
Okay.
Which was from the area Stalin was from in Gori. And they also made very, very strong Kakhetian, Saperavi, and Riccozzatelli. And those were never sweet.
Okay.
Those are always dry. And but when I got there in 2011, there were only 5 people making natural wine commercially. And it was my objective to give them as much attention as I possibly could so they could resist all the people looking to sell them technology. So that's why I wrote that book.
You're a tech blocker.
I am a tech blocker. Oh, God. Oh, man. Somebody's going to do a really nasty T-shirt about me. With
I
that.
know. Sorry. It just comes out of it just comes out my mouth sometimes. I mean, but I was looking at your titles. They're quite at least evocative, not provocative. Dirty Guide to Wine.
Well, the Dirty Guide to Wine. So I didn't want to write about wine anymore.
Okay.
At that point, I was working on a memoir about escaping a serial killer. So, but when my then agent tried to shop that book around, he was told, "We don't want this kind of book from Alice. We want another wine book." And I'm like, "Okay, but who's going to give me a good advance for a wine book? Because nobody buys fucking wine books. You know, it's like everybody wants a wine book, but nobody buys them."
I know.
So, you know, and I'm like, I'm not a dilettante here. I need to make money. And I'm figuring I could probably get more money for a serial killer book than I can for one book.
I mean, again, you're very ahead of the time. Look at all the streaming shows now. They're all about serial killers. It's all people want to watch is murder, death, kill.
Right, exactly.
So you know what you're doing.
But so I said, okay, I'm going to give you the geekiest wine book, and nobody. This is really it's changing, isn't it? The wine.
Yes. So you guys, I first one. I don't know anything about natural wines, but like this is another banger. You brought a great one. Obviously, Pascaline brought one, great one. Yannick brought a great one.
Yeah, but it's getting like a little fruit fly coming in
Yep.
now. The life is coming out, and with the more naturalness is starting to show right now, as opposed to just a pretty wine with maybe the Band-Aid.
It tastes like it tastes like fresh fruit, right? If you pick a strawberry, it's got like all that stuff on it, or like a dusty raspberry. That's what it's tasting. It's tasting like when you just pick something right from the field, and it's got that field, that kind of dust over it. It's tasty.
Yeah.
You know, this is definitely going to be one of the most interesting bottles of wine brought on the podcast, because people either go big, they bring like something like classic baller, or they bring something like to blow my mind in a different way, and then my mind is being blown right now because I'm drinking Tecate.
Fantastic. Anyway, so I came up with the book that I wanted. Like, there are all these wine books on terroir, but they don't tell me anything about how it's affecting what's in my glass. So there are geology books of vineyards, which is great. But so I wanted to organize, and also I'm really, really here as, even though I say that I don't want to go that about tired with wine. It bugs me that people still buy wine by grape. And this was my attempt to try to bring people back to place, because I think that is really the only way you get a very satisfactory wine experience. And so to bring it back, so I divided the world into soil types. And I was shocked when we got an offer. It was very low. And I basically was screaming at my agent on the street. I said, you go write a book for $8,000 with this kind of research. You do it. I'm not doing it. Sorry.
I know the reality when people like they go, well, what's this formula for what you're supposed to pay for a podcast? I'm like, that's like an eighth of my cost. I don't need your dollar.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing this at home on Zoom. Like
And then they said, well, you'll get it back in royalties. At that point, I'd yet to get any royalty at 2015. So,
but I want to say this. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I know another woman who wrote about natural wines, and she's not writing about wine anymore. Same thing. She came after you, but she's like, wine has had no love for me for all my writing for it. Like she's felt shunned by the business. And kind of shut out. So she's writing other stuff. That being said, your latest book. Should we talk about your latest? Let's talk about your latest book.
Talk about the latest one. Let's talk about the latest book. So, but after that came Natural Wine for the People. That was a wine guide. That was easy, whatever. And then I was like going back to I was starting to go back to fiction, thinking about writing plays again. And I wrote an essay that landed in New York Magazine about drinking alone during the pandemic. And my agent said, I want a book of essays. And I said, I always wanted a book of essays. It was my first really love, but they're super hard to get published. And she said, just do the proposal. Just leave the rest to me. Do the proposal, please. And so the only way that really made sense was to do it as a memoir, and to have a wine component. One of the things, if I have a life work, it's to try to not only to help people drink better, find the wines that will add enjoyment to their life, but also to try to knit that put wine into culture, to put wine into our culture. Now, obviously, wine was not part of my culture, this kind of wine. It is part of my culture now. Maybe drinking was part of my culture, but the way that I wanted to do that was by building her into stories, formative stories about my life that I feel people could relate to, and then tie it into wine. So each of the 15 essays have things like starting to smell, but it's also about the loss of unconditional love. I mean, I want my stories about wine to be stories about life. So that's what I was doing with this book.
Yeah, and how do you think you've done with it? Like, I mean, it's been out. I mean, obviously, it's turned in and it's published. You've been out on the road, the feedback, or just how did you feel about it?
Well, there's something very odd about this book that I will divulge here, which I haven't said in public because it's really new, is that it's going into second printing.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you look at my Amazon numbers, they kind of suck. So I don't know what's going on. Somebody is buying this book. They're not telling me about it. Because it's in second printing. I never had a book go into second printing in the second month. So that's fantastic. So that's showing me that it is hitting a nerve, and I really did want to reach the public that is not drinking. I want my followers certainly to read this book. Note to you all, go out and buy the damn book. It's only $17. It's a paperback. But I think that I'm reaching the other person who might be going to the supermarket to buy their wine, who just like the sound of the title or like the cover or saw a vineyard and thought it was pretty but had no idea what it meant to them. I think that this book is reaching another audience, which is extremely gratifying. And it's also landing with, I thought you did, it with a lot of men, which my reader has always been mostly male, oddly enough. And it's got an Alice in Wonderland cover. So,
I was thinking the title, I was like, it's going to be Alice in Natural Wine Land or something. But anyway, the cover it alludes to that.
Well, the cover alludes to it because the last chapter when I'm eating, psilocybin. So that's kind of when the magic, the mushroom is glowing on the cover. So, I think for a wine memoir, it's kind of surprising. There's serial killers. There's, psilocybin. There's tripping. There's concentration camps. There's Nina Simone. There's a bunch of things that you're not necessarily going to get in normal.
Well, I love that because I think that, when I started this, I didn't want it to be just like, we're going to talk about Vinus Vifera and all that shit and clonal selection and bricks. People connect to stories, and I think as wine wants to reach more people, it's going to be the stories. We don't need to know that Malbec is a blending grape in Bordeaux, and it found its home in Cahors, but it really made its way in Argentina. Like that's what this is about like your story. People are going to relate to like, oh, I went to college for this and didn't know what I wanted to do. They're going to relate to these points of, or I wanted to do this or whatever they wanted to do. And maybe it's not right, but they were like, I'm going to do this. And they made a decision like you did, like not to go 10 bar or work in hospitality.
Right.
Those are the points where I think people are going to connect and then want to come into wine. So like, people are buying wine at the supermarket, but then they're like, oh, I really like what she said about X. It has nothing to do with wine.
Right.
and then you kind of invite them into your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, one of the best, an early version of it, actually, when the book was finished, my illustrator wrote me a note saying that she read the book in one sitting, and then she went to a wine shop, and she said, "I'll never drink wine the same again." Well, first of all, I have never had an illustrator or book cover designer ever read any of my
Read your
books.
book. They just did their job.
So I'm like, wow, she read the book. That's amazing. And then I was like, wow, what a great reaction. Like, phenomenal.
Yeah.
So I feel I'm proud of the book. I'm proud of the work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of concentration camps, I think when I finally decided to reach out to you, because I read an article in Trink magazine that you had written. It was like how natural wine made me confront my German problem.
Yeah.
Say more about that, because obviously we know that you're of Jewish heritage. So say more about that.
So I was brought up in a family that just didn't buy German. You could not buy anything German. It was like you'd have a reaction to hearing the accent. Forget about like all. Basically, no German product.
Like, didn't you buy, like you said, you bought a
And
VW?
Well, no, yeah, my first car was a little blue bug. But anyway, so I had never, this is a piece that I had never read, and it's true, I was realizing that I had I would drink some Rieslings, but I had very bad experiences in Germany. And I just had this gut reaction against things German, which I realized filtered down to my going to Germany and also Austria. And so that story was really about my trying to understand what happened. And it did change. Of course, I had been friendly with winemakers in Austria and Germany. I started to change basically because of Natural Wine, where I visited. And I basically had to get over myself. So basically that's it. I just because of the natural wine, because of finding wine and really understanding the wine of beauty on its own. And it was really the night before Trump was elected where I was, like 3 Austrians and a German and a Jew walk into a bar kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're talking about it, that I just realized I just had to swallow it and get over it, because we're all people. I mean, it's as cliche as it is, but it was really just getting over this emotional reaction of nothing that had a German accent. For some reason, film was a different story. I could watch German film with no problem. Didn't bring that into the piece. The piece, which I felt was good, I felt I probably needed another 4,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Well, what would you have added to it?
I just need to think about it a lot more. What I would a lot more research is basically, it's just such a complicated problem. The loss of history of Jews in Germany and Austria in the wine world. They were not only merchants, and they think they were 75% of the wine merchants before World War II. But the whole culture of Jew as winemaker and landowner is lost. And it's the one book that I feel I have a cultural need to write, to try to reclaim that.
Yeah.
That, and to, put history in its right place. So that's what I would add, because that, I think, is part of it for me.
Well, you should write that book. I mean, there's a book about wine and war, and
Yeah.
and World War II was really gnarly. Everywhere they were just raiding cellars in France and ripping up vines, and I didn't really, you think of Champagne, that was one of the worst battles of World War II. It was just covered in blood, and now it's rebuilt. But I didn't think about that was one of Hitler's gripes. So they're the merchants in this, and so
But there were winemakers too, and
Well,
that's
that would
gone.
make sense, yeah.
And,
And it's lost.
And I have a couple, so I need basically one person to hang a story on. Otherwise, it's going to be in academic publishing, and I can't afford to do that unless I could go the grant route and stuff like that.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Nah, I don't do
No, this is like some. Hey, listen, this is some Steven Spielberg type movie. like yeah, out of this book. Maybe we get you paid here.
that. Yes, get me paid.
So, what are you doing now? Just touring in support of the book? You just said that you like to drop 1,000 words a day.
Mm-hmm.
So are you working on anything in particular, or are you just?
Well, I have my newsletter, so that still needs to clock along, even though I'm doing other things.
Do you charge for that? Is that
Yes,
okay.
yes.
I was like, okay.
That is
That's
the way I make a living.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it comes out every third week. Why every third week? I don't know.
That's when it comes out.
It's when it comes out. And so trying to reinvigorate it, put a lot of new good stuff in there. So that's some of my 1,000 words a day. Took the old novel out of the drawer.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started working on that again. Maybe this time I can get it right. I always do that when I'm not exactly sure. And had started a new novel, but I'm gonna get this one right first. That's what I'm doing. So we'll see.
So what do you like to drink? I mean, you drink. So we all drink, right?
We all drink too much.
We all drink too much. But like, do you have any favorite varietals? Because I know that's kind of like, is that anti-Alice? But like,
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
But that said, you know what? That said, if you're going to nail me down,
Yeah.
I do super like Cabernet Franc. I do love Chenin. I love Poussard and Trousseau and Gamay.
All right.
And Pais. And other than that, I like their region, so I drink a lot of Beaujolais. And what am I drinking a lot of these days? I don't know. I love Northern Rhone wines, so I do love Syrah.
All right. So now we're gonna play a little game.
Okay.
It's called FMK. Fuck, marry, or kill. 3 grapes. We have Trousseau. We have Chenin.
Oh, you tricked me.
I did trick you.
You just said you were going to trick me.
And Syrah. But not trick you like, you are the father. Like, because you drink so off the beaten path, it's not like I could peg you down, like I could name.
Yeah.
So I wanted, you have to have a little tension, right? Because
Okay.
there's one grape you don't get to drink anymore. You're killing it. One you're going to marry, you're going to be a daily drinking one. Like, that's my little side piece.
Okay, so what? Wait.
We had Chenin,
Yeah.
Trousseau, and Syrah.
Oh, this is we're talking Syrah, but let's Syrah really from the Northern
Rhone, yeah.
That's tough because there's only one white grape in there. Wait, so you said Trousseau, Syrah. I see I failed the memory test. All right, fine. We are going to kill Trousseau.
Okay. So no arbois for you.
We're going to fuck Chenin, and we're going to marry Syrah.
I like it. People hate that one. I did that. I did it with a bunch of Rhone winemakers, and I did Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre. They're like, ugh. They're like, I hate to say it, but I'm going to kill Mourvèdre. Whatever.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard.
You've nailed this.
Yeah. So, what is a James Beard Award wine writers? First of all, what did you win that James Beard Award for?
Oh God, it's such ancient history, but they always trot it out.
Come on, it's like when an Academy, you get to keep that.
I won it actually for that New York Times story for better or for worse, winemakers go high tech.
Mm.
And so it felt for me an extremely meaningful win.
I love it. I love it. And so, like, we've talked about, you've alluded, you've not even alluded, you've said there's struggles in being like this independent wine writer. What does your typical day look like for you? James Beard Award winning wine
James
journalist and writer.
A typical day. There's no. My mom is going to be 98 in a few weeks,
Oh, my
and
goodness.
she's needed a lot more of my attention. So my typical day is no longer my typical day because
Gotcha.
it depends on dealing with all of her caregivers, and a typical day is a lot about that. What used to be a typical
Yeah,
day?
what used to be, okay, rephrase, what used to be a typical day?
Oh, a typical day used to be getting up get up early, like 7, go through emails, go through things in Europe, a little bit of research and wine news, blah, blah, blah. I like to get my words in before the day starts.
That's key.
Yeah, that is key. While nobody's really get the work out of the way, but while nobody else is really bugging me.
Yep.
So I like to get the work out of the way. And I do try to get my work on my novel or my essay or whatever that I'm working on at that moment, then move on to the stuff that I've got to do for the newsletter. Take a break at around 11, wine tastings if they're around, that kind of thing. Take sort of a break, do exercise, which no longer the gym for me, but it's in my living room.
What do you do?
I do a combination of, I don't know, I belong to glow.com. So
Okay.
there's like power ballet
Okay.
and another kind of, there's a lot of, just extreme core work and what do they call it? I don't know. Just I like to jump a lot.
Okay. Oh, what it's
So I do like
plyometrics.
HIIT.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do, but I do a lot of Pilates, but also like kind of fat burning Pilates.
Yeah.
Or HIIT method or
Yep,
something
yep,
like that. So, but I do short and hard.
Right.
So I do really like 10 to 15 minute intervals a few times a day.
Nice. Nice.
I also live in a 5-floor walk-up.
Ah, that'll get you 10,000 steps in easily.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, what do you most?
I stopped the day somehow.
Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. It's all right. It's enough. And then whatever.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I used to teach productivity. Like, your one thing is getting 1,000 words, and like, if you do that, you've had a successful day. Like, you don't want to have these huge to-do lists. You're like, I need to do this, and
Right.
you can have one the day.
Yeah.
You know.
But sometimes I go on for a few thousand. So, but
Yeah.
at least a minimum
Yeah.
800 to 1,000.
Yeah.
If you do that, you have a book in 5 months.
See, and I know there's some aspiring writers out there listening. You got to writers write. They don't 10 bar. Well, I mean, if you have another job, just
Yeah.
if you have another job, that's fine. But maybe you can't do 1,000. Maybe commit to 200, whatever. But like, just start writing every day. And then, like you said,
Right.
sometimes you're gonna go,
Right.
and then you might wake up earlier
I
to
mean,
get.
honestly, so you go for 1,000 or you get 1,200 or whatever. And, but if you have 400 good words, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, but if I have an assignment from another publication, then the whole thing goes out the window.
Yeah.
And then I'm just on my ass for 12 hours writing. Like, and screaming, I can't get the lead. Where's the fucking lead? It's frustrating. And it's like, it's tough being a writer.
Yeah, it's tough being a creative, and
Yeah.
writing is so. I applaud writers.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what are you most excited about for the future? Just released a new book. You're working on like another book. What are you excited for? Like, natural wine is coming into the whole new era.
Wine has happened. So at this point, I've gone into cynicism
Okay.
instead of excitement. I am excited that there seems that people were doing, like, getting lost in their natural winemaking, and a lot of people seem to be coming down and focusing. And hopefully the best of natural wine is to come. But I am very much looking forward to getting back into the vineyards and getting back on the road. Because obviously 2 years has slowed down. Ethel has kind of clipped my wings a bit, so I'm really looking forward to, and I'm starting to travel again, very much so. So that's it. And when I get the idea for the next book, that's what I'll be most excited about.
Yeah.
But right now it's going to make the novel work.
Awesome. Well, Alice, thank you so much for coming here and coming in today. That 90 minutes kind of flew by. Tell people where they can find you, how they can be a part of what you're doing.
Okay. Thefeiringline.com. So there's a free portion of that I rarely update, but you can tool around and see what's there. See whether you want to plunk down the money for it. There's Substack, which feeds into the Feiring Line website, which is, by the way, a full website. That's basically the best way. Alice.Feiring on Instagram, Alice Feiring on Twitter. Thank you, MJ, for pronouncing my name right.
Oh,
I didn't even go over that.
I know. I think I went over that way early on, or someone told me.
Somebody told you.
Yeah, and I was
amazing.
like, because I would have screwed it up.
I know somebody had somebody got into an argument with somebody else. Says her name is Feiring, and she's like, she's my fucking friend. Her name is Feiring. It's like, no, her name is Feiring. Anyway, but that's how you tracked me, because it's that's tracking is, but whatever.
That's what they do.
That's what they do. Please stop by, see what I'm doing.
Yes, all my listeners out there. First of all, thank you very much. Don't forget to check out the show notes for each episode. That's where you will find info on the wine we drank, links to cool things we discussed. We'll put Alice's website and social handles in there so you can track her, and so much more. Until the next time, cheers to the Mavericks. You check that off. Philosophers, check that off. Deep thinkers, check that off. And wine drinkers, it's your boy MJ. Peace.